Well, hello, fellow Bible explorer. I have a squeaky chair. Well, hello, fellow Bible explorers, and welcome back to 2BeLikeChrist. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to be perfect. No problem. This is our continuation of the study of Matthew. We're in chapter 6, and we're in chapter 5. So, if you haven't gone and watched the last two videos, make sure to do that. That'll give you some context for what we're dealing with, because as we study verses 43 through 48 in this video, we've got to keep in mind the context of the last several verses. It's key. Jesus says, yet again, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." So Jesus is trying to get us to think in a Christ-like way about our relationship with our enemies. But who are our enemies? Well, in context, our enemies are the people who just wronged us, right? They're the people who slapped us on the face unjustly. They took our cloak and sued us. They inconvenienced us to walk a second mile, and they might have even ripped us off. And our tendency, as he says here, is to hate those people. And human nature seems to justify the fact that we would dislike them because, hey, they just totally did us wrong. But Jesus has begun the process of renovating our minds, and he says, instead of hating them, I actually want you to love them. And they may have been thinking, like we may be, that, hey, haven't I already loved these people? I went the second mile with them and I turned the other cheek. What else do I need to do? But Jesus says, I want you to take it a step further. In verses 38 through 42, what we find is Jesus trying to reform the outward actions of people towards those who mistreat them. But in verse 43, Jesus is actually going a level deeper. He doesn't just want to control the outward actions and make sure those are correct. He wants to get into the heart and to control the heart in which those outward actions are actually rooted. So he says, you treat people right on the outside, good. Now let's go a level deeper. And you may ask the question, why does Jesus have to do this? If I can treat someone well who mistreats me, isn't that enough? And the answer is no. The reason for this is that sometimes we can treat somebody well on the outside, but really be harboring hatred for them on the inside. Let me give you an example from my personal life. When I was younger, I used to get in fights with my brothers, as all brothers do, and Mom would sit us down on the couch and she would say, "You're not getting up until you hug each other and apologize." And at that point in time, the last thing in the world I wanted to do was give my brother a hug because I hated his guts. But oftentimes I would get up and give him a hug. And it was one of those grudging hugs like, I'm doing this just because, Mom says I have to and I can't get off this couch until I do. So I give him a hug. I'm obedient to my mother's command, but inside my heart, nothing's really changed. And this can happen in relationships even as adults, especially in the church. You think about sometimes a brother might have a problem with another brother. Maybe he's wronged him in the past. Maybe it was 20 years ago, but he has a problem with him and he's angry at him in his heart. You can still go up to that brother and shake his hand and smile at him and treat him like everything's all right. And your outward actions are correct and friendly, but inside is still rotten. I'm going to be nice to you because Jesus says I have to. Jesus is not after that shallow human nature, though. He's after the whole person. He wants the whole person to start thinking in a spiritual way. And that means that you're going to love the person who just smacked you across the face. You're going to care about the good of the person who inconvenienced you to walk the mile. You're going to have this agape love that the church talks about so much for the person who took you to court and sued you for what was rightfully yours. He then goes on and says, it's not just love, but I want you to actually spend your time for the good of those people, and I want you to pray for them. When we're in personal prayer, it's probably some of the most genuine time that we have with God, in general, because we're not going to lie to Him. We know He knows our hearts, and you're not going to get away with anything. And so the idea is these people need to be in your thoughts. They need to be in your prayers, and your heart needs to be directed to rethink everything that you've been taught about how to treat and then how to think about these people who hate you. We have a tendency to gossip about the people that are our enemies, right? We go tell our friends how terrible they are. We go talk to the leadership of the church and say, shame on this guy. But keep this in mind. If your enemies aren't in your prayers, then you don't need to be talking to anyone about them but God. Here's my question for you. Yes, you watching this video, and my challenge. Do you pray for your enemies? When is the last time you prayed and applied this verse to your life. The people that drive you crazy, maybe the people that abuse you. When's the last time you prayed for their good and for the good of their soul? Ever? I find that this is a Bible verse that I just ignore sometimes. I just don't apply it because, well, it's not one of the bigger verses in the Bible, so it can just be ignored, right? No. Pray for your enemies and care about their good. And that's my challenge. As we wrap up this video, we ask the question, why does Jesus need us on these particular levels? He wants our outward actions, and then he wants the heart that is generating those outward actions. And the answer comes to us in verse 45. He says, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. The goal of this channel is to be like Christ. And Jesus is here saying, it's when you get these two levels right that you begin to look like a son of God. You begin to look like me. That's how we look like Christ. When we can renovate our hearts to the point where we can look at our enemies and treat them well and then go home and pray for their good, then we're on to something. And Jesus continues and he says, for if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? If you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles the same? Anybody can treat someone who treats them well kindly. That's just human nature. Jesus is saying, I want you to begin to take on God's nature. And so I need your outward actions and your heart. Verse 48, key verse in this text, you therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, what does it mean to be perfect? You probably know that when you see this in the New Testament, it doesn't mean that you never make a mistake. Jesus has already told us that we're going to make mistakes. It means that you're going to be complete. And so this verse threw me a little bit. What does it mean when I first read it? How are we complete in this? And you're complete by bringing together the two levels, right? Correcting your heart so that your outward actions then are correct towards other people. And looking more and more like Jesus all the time. Jesus didn't grudgingly go to the cross and say, oh, I'm doing this just because my Father suggests that I do it for these lousy, no good people. Jesus' outward actions take him to the cross. And his inward actions, his heart, what's going on in here, causes him to say, while he's hanging there, bloody and bruised and nearly dead, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Outward actions combined with correct heart make us look like Jesus, complete. Thanks again for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, share the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and like the video. If you have any suggestions or any comments, comment down below, and I'll talk to you later.